Alright, so this is going to be a tutorial about how to install Sync Studio for Daz and Blender, which is a small add-on that I created to make it easier to animate Daz figures in Blender and then sync those animations back to Daz Studio and render them with Iray. Alright, to get started you can go to the itch page and then download the add-on from there by clicking the download now button here. You can actually pay me if you want to, but this is a free add-on, so you can just like head over to the downloads right away and download these two guys, one for Blender, one for Daz. And once you've downloaded these two guys, you should be ready to install the add-ons. So let's get started with installing the one for Blender by opening Blender and then going into Edit, Preferences, Get Extensions, and then clicking this little arrow down here and selecting Install from Disk. And then going into where you downloaded these, which should be your downloads folder, and then selecting the Sync Studio for Blender file and install from disk. That should install it. Now you can close this and head over to the end panel, open this, and now you should have a Sync Studio tab over here. Click it. And now what you need to do is set the sync path. The sync path is an empty folder somewhere on your hard disk where Sync Studio can create subfolders and files to exchange data between Daz and Blender. So I always select my library sync for this, which you can already see contains a bunch of folders from previous tests. It is not necessary that you put this into my library, although I find it convenient because it means like it's together with all the other Daz content. Just make sure that there's nothing important in here because it could get overwritten. Otherwise, you can select any folder you want. Okay, let's click accept and it will set the sync path here. And what this did is it created a file in roaming Daz 3D Studio 4 temp sync studio settings.json. And this only contains the sync path and nothing else. And this is basically how both the add-on on the Daz side and the add-on on the Blender side communicate this path between each other, so they both know where to read and write the files that they're creating. Okay, so that should be it on the Blender side of things. And now we can head over to Daz Studio and install the plugin here. So you should install it into one of your content libraries. Probably my library, although I'm going to install it into my test library, which is where I am installing everything that I test. So let's go over to the downloads and open the file Sync Studio for Daz, which contains the add-on for Daz. You should be familiar with this directory structure if you've ever installed anything into a Daz content library. So let me navigate to my test library, drag and drop everything into my test library. It will ask me this because I already did this before. I'm just going to skip this. You should not get this dialog. And that's it. Now it's installed. So back in Daz Studio, now we can go to my test library, scripts, Schlongborn, Sync Studio, and in there, this will be the main script, but there is an optional thing that you can do, which is you can go to setup and you can double click Sync Studio, install smart content. Should add these little tags, and now what it did is installed like the product into Daz smart content system. So now Daz is aware of like these files being scripts. You can also go here into smart content, click on all products, and then you should have the Sync Studio product in here, and you should be able to navigate to the scripts category and access these scripts here. Okay, so let's go back to the content library and let's go back in here into Sync Studio. And one thing that we need to do to set up Sync Studio in Daz is we need to create the Sync Studio menu. That is kind of important because, let me just do that. There it is. Because this button here serves as a status indicator for the background syncing process. Let me just demonstrate that. Can just click it. You'll get this warning because I need to save the scene for syncing to work. More on that in a bit, but let's just ignore it for now. You can see how now the syncing is active and it replaced the play button with this red X. If I click it again, it stops the syncing. Okay, so you may have already noticed that it also created the sync control node when I started the syncing. Let's take a look in there real quick. This is just another way to control the syncing background process at runtime. There is a terminate button which will let you kill the background syncing. So like if it's enabled, like so, then the button should be on. If you click it off, then the syncing will stop. There's a watch folder property, which just is an indicator mostly for where the files are being created that Blender and Daz both use to exchange data. So if you want to, you can change the folder here. It's because the scene has no name. Sync Studio picks no scene name sync as default name. Otherwise, it would select your scene name and create a folder depending on that here. So let's leave it as no scene name sync. And then lastly, there's the 0 pose frame, which I'm gonna explain later. Okay, so like one last thing about the sync control node. If the syncing is active and you delete it, then the syncing should stop. So that's a way to basically always force stopping the syncing background process. And that should really be it on the Daz side of things. Now I'm going to create a scene and demonstrate the syncing with a concrete example. Okay, so here we are with a concrete example. Genesis 8.1 male in all of its beauty. And this guy is going into Blender now. Over at Blender, nothing is going on other than the default queue. Let's delete it. And we got to start the syncing process. And if you've noticed, no pop-up this time because this is a saved scene with a name. So if you go into the sync control node and look into sync, we can see that the watch folder is actually Sync Studio Demo 2 this time, which is the same as the file name of the scene. And now by default, Sync Studio will not actually sync anything. You need to tell Sync Studio what you want to sync. This is important because like large scenes are very complex and take a while. So you need to specifically select the one thing or like all of the things that you want to sync, which is convenient if say you just want to like animate one figure in your complex scene. Then you don't need to sync the entire scene. You just need to sync the one figure. To select a node as something that's being synced, you can use this plus icon here, which will create a sync child node under the node that you've selected. And this will mark it as a node that is being synced. And you can repeat that for any other node in the scene. Like I could select these shoes and click plus again to create another sync child under the shoes. And now the syncing would sync the Genesis 8.1 male node and the DSO shoes, but not the shirt, not the pants, not the belt, only the shoes. To remove a sync child, I can either use this minus here, or I can just like manually delete it, which is far simpler actually. And instead of adding all of these children one by one to the syncing process, I can also go to the sync child of the top level node and enable the enable sync everything below property in there. And now all of the children that are below the Genesis 8.1 male node are going to be synced. And the other property in there, the prevent sync anything below property, basically just does the opposite. So if you have like a lot of sync childs in a deep hierarchy, then instead of like going through all of them and disabling them or deleting them, you can just like go to the top level one and enable the prevent sync anything below property, and it will exclude the entire subtree of the scene from the syncing process. Okay, so with enable sync everything below property enabled and the syncing process active, we should be able to sync the scene over to Blender. We need to remember the scene name Sync Studio Demo 2 and then enter that into the scene field in the Sync Studio tab in the end panel in Blender. And now, once we click Import Sync, we should get this waiting for Daz, and Daz should export the scene. It blinks like that, and you can click it while it's doing that. And then the scene is automatically imported into Blender. And there it is. Now this should be set up automatically so that everything is already animatable. Basically, you can just select the bone, animate it, and you can see how the clothes are moving with the arm, and same thing for the leg. The shoes are moving with the feet. So everything is already attached to the main rig. So we gotta talk a bit about the hierarchy that it imported. If I expand this guy, you can clearly see that it imported the same hierarchy as in this, with Genesis 8.1 male as parent, and then the belt, pants, shirt, ATC as children. It also created the Sync Studio Demo 2 collection, which you can move around if you want, but like the name should stay the same. The names in general of all of these nodes are kind of relevant, at least on the Daz side. So if you rename the Genesis 8.1 male node here in Blender, everything is going to be fine. But if you rename the node on the Daz side, then you need to also tell Sync Studio about this change by changing the node label here. So you can click this little checkbox and make it editable. Now you could actually change the node label to whatever name you've chosen on the Daz side, and then Sync Studio will be able to find or connect this Genesis 8.1 male node with whatever you've named the Genesis 8.1 male node on the Daz side together, and figure out that they're both the same. However, I would just recommend not renaming anything after you've synced it. That's how I generally do it, and that makes things a lot easier. Now, one of the things I wanted to demonstrate here is actually that Sync Studio supports partial imports, meaning if you want to add new clothing to a figure after you've synced it, or change the clothing, then you can do that without like deleting the entire figure and re-importing it again. Basically, you can just like delete a node, a child node, like so, or let's do the shoes as well, like so. Now the shoes are gone, the hair is gone, and if I click import sync, it will import only those two followers to the figure and attach them again, and there they are. And using the same principle, one of the things I wanted to add before we continue is the Genesis 8.1 face controls. So let me just head over to Daz, select the Genesis 8.1 male, go to Smart Content, go to the Store Essentials, go to Anatomy, and then add the Genesis 8.1 male face controls to the figure. There they are, barely visible. And now, if I go back to Blender and click Import Sync, it should add the face control to the figure. And these guys are actually very useful to do facial animation. But to do so, now is the point where we need to start talking about setting up the rig. Setting up the rig will replace this one-to-one copy of the Daz rig with a more convenient inverse kinematics rig. Let's just select the Genesis 8.1 male and click Setup Rig, and you will be presented with this dialog where you can select which morphs you want to load when setting up the rig. I will basically unselect everything here and only select FUX and JCMs. FUX because I have the face controls, and JCMs because those are just the morphs that make it possible to bend the joints and have the figure adjust to the bends. And then I'm going to click OK. Now this part, the loading of the morphs in particular, is actually very slow. So that's why I selected only 2 of the categories to basically make this as fast as possible. If you load everything, and in particular if you have a slow computer, then this can actually take a while. But once this is done, you are pretty much ready to animate this figure now, and you can use the IK controls to easily animate arms, legs, You can change the foot pose like so. You have a hip that you can control, and of course the face controls can be used to control the facial animation. Okay, so now I want to explain these push and pull buttons over here, and for that I'll have to go back into Daz and explain something that I skipped over previously, which is the zero pose frame. So the zero pose frame is quite simply the frame where everything is supposed to be at zero value. Because if you sync a figure over to Blender, every property will be created with 0 as its default value. Meaning if you have anything set at any value other than 0, then Blender and Daz will have different values for the same property. And that means if you want to animate that property, then the animation that you create in Blender will not work in Daz. And so for anything that you want to animate, you need to make sure that it's zeroed at the 0 frame. Of course, there's exceptions to that. Let's say I had the Michael 8 morph applied to this figure, then its value would be 1 at the 0 frame, but I wouldn't really care that it's 1 because instead of 0, because I most likely won't want to animate the Michael 8 morph. Okay, so why am I telling you all of that? Because I want to demonstrate the pull functionality, which is for pulling a pose from Daz into Blender. And for that, I will have to apply a pose to the Genesis 8.1 male figure here. And I am going to do something very important first, which is I'm going to switch from frame 0 to frame 1. Because otherwise we would be changing the 0 frame, which, as I just said, we're not supposed to be doing. Alright, well, let's go in here, go to the poses by region, full body, and let's find a nice pose for this Genesis 8.1 male. How about this one talking on the phone? Alright, there we go. Now we have a pose applied that we can pull into Blender. Alright, so let's head back into Blender and click the pull button, because that's what I wanted to demonstrate. And now what should happen is we get the pose. Okay, so now we have the guy posed in Blender, and as you can see, the colors changed on the rig, meaning it's now this bright green here. That means the FK rig is now active. The way this works is like the rig basically has two bone structures, one for forward kinematics, which is just standard Daz rig, and one for inverse kinematics. And to switch between them, you need to use this snap IK and snap FK buttons. But there's one important thing that we need to do first, which is we need to enable the keyframing. Otherwise, when you do snap IK, it won't actually keyframe the properties that are being used to control the snapping. So now I snapped it back to IK, and now we can basically modify this pose. Well, let's do this. Let's do this. Give him a bit of a stance there, I guess. Like so. Or maybe do this. Oh, no, not going to do this. Maybe like this and this. Sadly, I don't have any finger IK, since this is diffeomorphic. Maybe Tom is going to implement it, but it's possible I might do it myself at some point. Right now, the fingers are just a standard forward kinematic bone structure. So, no IK there, sadly. Anyways, we're just doing a demo here, so it doesn't really matter all that much. And now let's just demonstrate the push button, which, as you maybe can guess, will push the modified pose back to Daz. So if we go here and look at it, we can see he's now having this like leg stance that we created in Blender. And that is pretty much it for this demonstration. There's a lot more to it. There are things like well, pushing the range and pulling the range. That's kind of obvious how this works. There are all of these morphs, or how basically importing morphs works. Just very briefly, instead of like loading specific morphs, you basically can just like pull them. So you just create a keyframe for the like thing that you want to sync over, and then you just pull, and it will create the morph and set a keyframe, and then you will have the morph in Blender. There's also this little menu over here, which you can use to quickly access the snapping in particular, instead of like, so you don't have to go to the end panel all the time. You can also push and pull from there. And you also have a morph list in here, which currently contains nothing, because this one is only going to show the ones that are keyframed. So if I add a keyframe on a random one, then it will show up here. I think I'll leave it at that. I hope you learned enough from this video to get you started with Sync Studio, and that you'll give it a try. If you run into any issue, feel free to comment here on it. I'm really looking forward to your feedback. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please leave a like and hit subscribe while you're at it. I will continue working on Sync Studio and have actually several additional features planned for it. The plugin will continue to be a free plugin, and so I hope that I see you around for the next update, and until then, happy syncing.